For 10 long years, I lived in a world wrapped in silence. And yet the loudest moment of my life, the one that shattered everything, was the moment I chose not to say a single word. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday that pretends it's just another brick in the wall of retirement life. The birds outside made their usual rustling chaos in the trees. My coffee steamed in the chipped mug Clara had given me the Christmas before she passed. My son, James, had called that morning, his voice a familiar hum of syllables I could no longer decipher, though I always nodded and said, yeah, of course, as if I could. That was our routine. Pretend I heard, pretend he believed me. But that day wasn't routine. Not at all. At 10:47 a.m., the device arrived. A new hearing aid, experimental, powerful, part of a clinical trial I had secretly joined months ago through the Veterans Hospital. I hadn't told James. He'd have worried, overthought it, tried to step in, like always. I didn't want his permission. For 10 years, since the stroke took the music of the world from me, I had felt like a ghost. Present, but not really. Alive, but never truly part of the scene. James did what he could, called often, visited when he wasn't drowning in deadlines and raising his own son. But we both knew our conversations had become one-sided performances, where he talked and I smiled. That morning, when I slipped the device behind my ear and activated it for the first time, I heard something that made my knees buckle. The wind. Not just the movement, but the texture of it. The creak of the tree branches. The distant bark of a dog. And then, through the thin walls of my old house, the radio from next door, some 80s rock anthem, loud and awful and beautiful. I cried. It was ugly crying, the kind that comes from deep places, years of frustration, isolation, pretending, and slowly fading into irrelevance. The sound of the world didn't come back all at once. It crashed in like a storm. And then I did something even more unexpected. I didn't tell James. Not right away. It wasn't spite. Or maybe it was. A little. He had become so accustomed to the version of me who couldn't hear, who needed help filling out forms, who smiled blankly when his son told me stories I didn't catch. We had drifted into a rhythm of quiet distance. James meant well. But meaning well doesn't always translate into understanding. I wanted something selfish. I wanted a moment. Just one day, maybe two, of hearing everything without anyone knowing. Of watching the world move and being part of it, even if only silently. I walked to the bakery down the street. I hadn't gone on foot in years, afraid I'd miss a horn, a shout, a warning. That day, I heard every footstep. The crunch of gravel. The slam of a distant car door. A child crying. A barista's laughter echoing from the cafe. Inside the bakery, I listened to people. Not just their words, but their inflections. The elderly couple arguing softly over which pie to buy. The teenager sighing as she punched numbers into the register. The clatter of a spoon dropped on tile. I didn't speak. I just listened. It was enough. That evening, James called again. His voice, now clear, came through the phone with all its warmth and exhaustion. He was driving home from work. I could hear traffic, his music in the background. "Dad," he said, "you doing okay? You sound tired lately." He hadn't noticed the difference. Maybe my voice still carried that same weariness. I had to suppress a laugh. "Just the same old bones," I replied. "You know how it is." But the truth was, I felt alive. I felt young, in the way the world touches you when you can fully participate in it. I listened to every word he said that night. I heard his breath catch when he talked about a project going wrong. I heard the careful way he avoided talking about my grandson, Ben. There'd been tension there, something about how I was too distant, not engaging enough. I had always blamed it on not hearing well, on being too tired to try harder. But the truth? I had been scared. Scared of pretending and still failing. Scared of how the world had moved on without me. The next morning, I heard Ben's voice for the first time, really heard it. James brought him over. Same as every Saturday. Usually, I smiled and nodded as Ben told me things I didn't catch. I'd pat his shoulder, hand him a cookie, maybe say wow, at what seemed like the right moments. But that day, Ben ran in, his sneakers squeaking, and shouted, "Grandpa, look what I made in art class." I turned, looked at him fully. He was holding a mess of paint and paper. I saw the joy on his face, heard the pride in his little voice. It hit me like a wave. "It's a dragon," he said. "But it's got a cape. Like a hero dragon." I bent down to his level, looked him in the eyes, and said, "It's amazing, Ben. The cape is my favorite part. He froze. He blinked. Grandpa, he whispered. You heard me? James stood frozen by the doorway, grocery bags in hand. He dropped one. You? Dad. I nodded. Yeah. Ben launched into my arms. James didn't speak. His face moved through about 4 different emotions in 3-second shock, confusion, something like betrayal, and then finally, relief. You can hear, he said. You've been able to hear. I nodded again, slower this time. Just 2 days. He sat down at the kitchen table like someone had punched the air out of him. He looked at me, really looked at me. Why didn't you tell me? The answer wasn't simple, but I gave it the only way I could. Because I needed to remember who I was without needing someone else to explain the world to me. James didn't respond. He looked down at the table. Then he laughed a small, tired sound. I guess I deserved that. No, I said, crossing the room to sit across from him. You didn't. You did your best. I was just too lost in my silence to reach back. We spent that Saturday talking more than we had in months. Maybe years. Ben chattered beside us, no longer needing to shout. He talked about school, about soccer, about some kid named Jasper who cheated at tag. James watched me the whole time, eyes glassy, like he was seeing a ghost coming back to life. We didn't talk about the years we lost. Not then. But in every moment that followed, the shared meals, the slow walks, the whispered jokes, I knew we were making up for them. Quietly, gently. I had regained my hearing. But what mattered more? I had chosen to listen. James didn't call for a few days after that. He texted. Polite, brief things. Let me know how the new hearing aid's doing. Ben says hi. Got caught in traffic. Might stop by this weekend. I didn't push. I knew he needed space. His silence wasn't anger, it was processing. For years, I had been a different version of myself in his life. Passive, quiet, fading. Now I was back, and maybe that was jarring. I spent those days exploring sound like a man just released from a cell. The ticking of clocks in different rooms. The hiss of the coffee pot. The rustle of a newspaper. For the first time in a decade, I turned on the television without captions. It was overwhelming at first. News anchors barked, sitcoms shouted. But somewhere between the noise, I rediscovered laughter. My own. By Thursday, James rang the doorbell instead of letting himself in. That, more than anything, told me how uncertain he felt. When I opened the door, he looked tired. Still in his work clothes, jacket slung over one shoulder, hair a little messy. I didn't want to come in like everything was normal, he said. That's okay, I replied. Nothing's normal anymore. But that's not bad, is it? He shook his head slowly. No, it's not. I stepped aside. He walked in, quieter than usual. He looked around the house as if trying to recognize it. Or maybe trying to recognize me in it. I've been thinking, he said as he sat down, about how much you must have hidden. How many times I talked at you instead of to you. How many stories I told, assuming you didn't really catch them. You weren't wrong, I said, settling into my usual chair. But you were always there. And that mattered. He nodded. I don't want to be the kind of son who misses who his father really is. Or was. That's not who you are, I told him. But I understand the guilt. I've carried my own. He looked down at his hands. Ben said something yesterday. We were walking past the park, and he asked why Grandpa suddenly feels more like Grandpa again. I smiled. Smart kid. Smarter than me, apparently. We sat in silence for a while, not the kind I'd known before, filled with frustration and distance, but a thoughtful one. Shared. Full of sound beneath it. I didn't tell you right away because I didn't want to become someone you had to adjust for again, I said finally. I wanted to come back on my terms. James nodded. And you did. And honestly, I think I needed that, too. The next time Ben came over, it was different. He wasn't trying to shout across a canyon anymore. We were building a bridge. Together. He brought over his Lego dragons and made me voice them. I gave the red one a deep Scottish growl and the blue one a squeaky cowboy accent. He laughed so hard he dropped his juice. James watched from the kitchen doorway, arms folded, quiet smile on his face. For years, I'd been an observer in my own family. Now, I was participating again, and they were letting me. But as the joy settled into something steady, something sustainable, a new fear began to bloom in me. What if this was temporary? What if the hearing aid failed? What if the trial didn't go long enough? What if I lost it again? I didn't say it aloud. Not to James. Not to Ben. Not to anyone. But every night, When I took the device off and the silence returned like a wave swallowing a coastline, I was reminded this gift was fragile. So I began recording my days. A little journal on an old cassette recorder I found in the garage. My voice sounded older than I remembered, but stronger, too. I heard the kettle hiss this morning, like it was breathing fire, I said in one entry. I heard the mailman whistle an out-of-tune Beatles song. It was awful. It was wonderful. It felt like writing letters to my future self, or maybe to the man I'd been during those silent years. As if I owed him this. Proof that things could come back. Weeks passed. The clinical trial check-ins went well. No complications. My hearing remained sharp, steady. They even asked if I'd consider becoming a speaker for future participants, someone who could tell his story. That terrified me. Not the talking, but the truth-telling. Could I really stand in front of strangers and explain how I disappeared inside my own life? Could I explain that I let the world slip past me, not just because I couldn't hear, but because I didn't want to confront what that silence said about my place in it? James encouraged me. You don't have to be polished, he said. Just be honest. That's what people need. So I agreed. The first session was at a small clinic downtown. Just 10 or so patients, all at different stages of hearing loss. Some had been living with it for decades. Some were just beginning to fade. I stood at the front of the room, holding a microphone I didn't need, but used anyway. It felt like armor. My name is Thomas, I began. I was hard of hearing for 10 years. And for most of that time, I pretended I was okay. I smiled, nodded, laughed at the right moments. But inside, I was drowning. A woman in the second row wiped her eyes. I got my hearing back 2 months ago through a trial device. And for the first 48 hours, I didn't tell a soul. Not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted to hear the world without it needing to adjust for me. I wanted one selfish moment where I belonged again. There was a stillness in the room I hadn't expected. Not discomfort, not judgment, just understanding. When I finished, people came up to shake my hand. Some cried, some just nodded. One man, younger than I'd expected, maybe in his early 40s, looked at me and said, "You made me feel seen." That stayed with me. After that, the fear started to ease. I wasn't just a man with restored hearing. I was a man using it, living again, offering something to others. But nothing grounded me more than Ben. He started asking deeper questions. About the war. About Grandma. About my childhood. I realized he saw me not just as Grandpa the cookie giver, the Lego builder, but as a whole person. One night, he climbed into my lap with a flashlight and asked, "Were you scared when you couldn't hear, Grandpa?" I didn't sugarcoat it. Yeah, I was. A lot. Did you think it would ever come back? Sometimes. But I stopped hoping, and that made it worse. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm glad it came back. Because now I get to hear you laugh. And your laugh is my favorite sound." I held him so tight, I thought I might crush him. Months passed, and autumn came. The leaves fell like confetti across the lawn, and I bought new boots just so I could hear them crunch beneath me. James came over more often. We repaired old fences, literal and metaphorical. We cooked together, watched old movies without subtitles, argued over baseball teams again. One night, after Ben had fallen asleep on the couch, James turned to me and said, "I missed you, Dad. I didn't even know how much until you were really back." I looked at him and said something I'd never said, not even when I lost my hearing. "I'm proud of you." He didn't say anything, just nodded, eyes shining. There was one final step I had to take. A letter. To Clara. I wrote it by hand. Slow. Careful. Pages of it. Telling her everything. About the silence. About the recovery. About how much I had missed her laughter and how, thanks to this gift, I remembered it exactly. I buried it in the garden, under the rose bush she loved. The next morning, I stood outside, wind rustling the leaves, and whispered, "I can hear you now, love." And maybe, just maybe, I did. The winter came slowly, like an old friend hesitant to knock on the door. I welcomed it this year. For the first time in a long while, the cold didn't feel isolating. It was sharp, yes, but clear, like every breath was a message written in frost. And I could hear it all, the whistle of the wind down the chimney, the groan of the radiator, the quiet tap of melting ice on the window pane. One morning, as I was making oatmeal, Ben sat at the kitchen table and asked, "Did it hurt, Grandpa?" When the world got quiet, I stirred slowly, the spoon clinking against the pot. "No," I said. "That's the strange part. It didn't hurt when the sound left me. It hurt when I realized no one noticed I was disappearing. He looked up at me with those deep, thoughtful eyes children sometimes carry far too early. I would have noticed. I know, buddy, I said. That's why I came back. By January, I was speaking at clinics more often, sometimes to patients, sometimes to doctors, occasionally to rooms full of family members' loved ones trying to understand what it meant to live in silence. I always started with the same thing. I didn't just lose sound. I lost connection. And that's the real danger no one talks about. People listened, really listened. I could see it in their faces. The tears, the quiet nods, the spouses squeezing each other's hands. And always there would be someone who lingered afterward, wanting to tell me their own story. A brother they'd lost to silence. A mother who refused hearing aids out of pride. A daughter who never knew her father had stopped hearing bedtime stories halfway through her childhood. We carry so many unspoken griefs, I learned. And the cruelest part of silence? It makes them harder to name. It was on a bitter cold February morning when I got the call. James. Voice shaky. Dad, Ben's in the hospital. I dropped the mug in my hand. It shattered against the tile, but I didn't hear it. All I could hear was the sound of my son's breath on the phone, fast and sharp like panic trying not to be panic. Car slid on black ice, he said. He's okay, I think, just a broken arm. But he hit his head. They're checking for concussion. I was already putting on my coat. I'm coming, I said. Right now. The hospital was all noise. Monitors beeping, intercoms blaring, shoes squeaking against the linoleum. But somehow, through all of it, I picked out his voice. Small, tired. It was so loud, Dad. I pushed open the curtain. James stood at Ben's side, holding his hand like it was made of porcelain. His face was a storm of fear, guilt, and something else, something raw. Ben's eyes widened when he saw me. Grandpa, I'm here, I said, moving closer. Tough day, huh? He tried to smile, but it hurt too much. I could see it in the twitch of his mouth. His left arm was wrapped, his forehead bandaged. The nurse said I'll be okay. Just a bruise in my brain, not a crack. I sat beside him. Good. Because dragons don't quit after a crash landing. They rise again. He chuckled. A weak one, but it was enough. James sat back, watching us. And then he said something I'll never forget. Dad, if this had happened a year ago, if you still hadn't been able to hear. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We both knew. The drive home was quiet. Not silent quiet. James drove. I sat in the passenger seat, hands folded. The snow tapped against the windshield like shy fingers. You know, James said finally, I used to think I understood what you lost. When your hearing went, I thought it was just an inconvenience. A barrier. He paused, took a breath. But watching Ben today, knowing that you could be fully present for him in that room, it hit me how wrong I was. I didn't interrupt. I didn't realize how much you must have grieved, he continued. Not just for sound, but for space, meaning, the ability to be part of something without asking the world to slow down for you. I turned toward him. I did grieve, I said, but I didn't know how to show it. And I didn't want pity, especially not from my son. His knuckles tightened around the wheel. I never pitied you. I know. That's why it was so hard. We didn't speak again until we reached my house. As he parked, he looked at me and said, I'm proud of you too, Dad, for fighting your way back. I smiled. I didn't do it alone. Spring came early that year. Ben recovered fully, and with even more energy than before. At one point, he asked if his cast could be turned into a rocket launcher. I said no. He said, then what's the point of having a broken arm? Fair question, really. He was the one who suggested we make a podcast. You've got stories, he said one afternoon, and people should hear them. I'll be your co-host. I laughed. You mean you'll be the star? He shrugged. Obviously. So we started small, recording into my phone, sitting at the kitchen table. Episodes about silly things at first. His favorite books, my worst haircuts, the time I accidentally glued my fingers together in 1974. But then, deeper stuff. We called it the Grandpa Tapes. We talked about loneliness, about grief, about the importance of saying what matters while you still can. And people listened. Friends, family, even a few strangers online. Ben would read the comments out loud, proud as a rooster. One afternoon, a package arrived. Inside was a letter from a man in Michigan, mid-50s, former Marine, hard of hearing. He wrote, I hadn't spoken to my daughter in 6 years. She got tired of repeating herself. I got tired of pretending I understood. But then I listened to your story, and I called her. She cried. I cried. We're having dinner next week. I read it twice, then a third time, and finally I wept. Not because it was sad, but because I finally understood what it meant to matter again. The following week, I went back to the rose bush in the garden. I didn't bury another letter. I dug up the first one. I read it out loud. Every word. I thought the silence would protect me. It didn't. I thought time would heal. It didn't. I thought I was gone. But I came back. And they were waiting. You were right, Clara. Love stays. Even when sound doesn't. That night, I slept with the window open. No hearing aid. Just the wind. The silence was there. Yes, but it didn't scare me anymore. It was no longer the absence of sound. It was space. For everything I had gained. It was sometime in early May when the lilacs bloom and the air smells like memory that James finally asked me something I had been dreading and hoping for. He was sitting on the porch, sipping iced tea. I had just come back from the clinic after another speaking session. He watched me settle into the chair across from him, then asked, "Have you thought about what happens if the hearing goes again?" I froze. Not because I hadn't thought about it, but because I thought about it all the time. Every morning when I woke up and put the device in. Every night when I took it off and stepped back into silence. Every time the battery flickered or the signal cut for half a second too long. It was always there, waiting. I took a long breath. "Yeah," I said. "I have. And I'm scared. But I'm not afraid." He tilted his head. "What's the difference?" "I'm scared of losing the sound again," I said slowly. "But I'm not afraid of disappearing. Not anymore. Because I found myself again, James. And now I know I'm more than what I can or can't hear." He nodded. I soft. "I just don't want to lose you again." "You won't," I said. "Not this time. I won't let that happen." The wind rustled the bushes below us. We sat there, listening not to the silence, not to the noise, but to each other. Later that week, I received an invitation. The VA hospital wanted to honor a few veterans involved in the hearing restoration program. It was a small ceremony, they said. Nothing formal. Just a few people, some doctors, a few families. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go. The idea of being recognized still felt foreign to me. I'd spent so many years fading into the background. It almost felt wrong to step into the spotlight again. But Ben found the letter before I could hide it. "You're going," he declared. "You're going to wear that tweed jacket with the elbow patches, and you're going to tell them the Dragon Cape story." "The what?" "You know, how I was your first audience again." I chuckled. "So now you're my agent?" "Obviously," he said with a grin. 10% of your cookies. Lifetime deal." So I went. I wore the jacket. And I told the Dragon Cape story. I talked about silence and sound. About how hearing is more than a sense, it's a bridge. And about how bridges can be rebuilt, even after a long, long time. There was a moment, during the ceremony, when I looked into the crowd and saw James and Ben sitting in the front row. Ben was waving, a little too enthusiastically. James looked at me the way I imagine I looked at him the day he was born, overwhelmed, proud, and a little in awe. And something shifted in me then. I had been living the last few months like someone trying to make up for lost time. But in that moment, I realized I didn't need to catch up anymore. I was exactly where I needed to be. One evening, a few weeks later, I was alone in the house. Ben and James had just left after one of our weekly dinners. We'd made lasagna, burned the cheese, argued about who the best Batman was. Ben said Lego Batman. James nearly had a stroke. I was washing the dishes when the hearing aid beeped. Low battery. I reached for the charger but paused. I looked around. The kitchen was dim. The only sound was the hum of the fridge, the occasional creak of old wood. I reached up, gently took the device out, and set it on the counter. And just stood there, in silence. But it didn't feel empty this time. It felt full, like I could still hear them. James's laugh echoing down the hall. Ben's voice, high and fast, telling me a story about a three-headed robot that bakes cookies. Clara's humming from the old days, drifting in from a memory. They were all there, inside me. I didn't need the sound to hold on to them. I just needed to remember. So I stood there a little longer. Then I whispered, not with my voice, but with my whole heart. "I'm still here." And this time, the silence answered back. Summer came like a blessing. And with it, a new kind of rhythm. Ben was out of school, and every Thursday became podcast day. He'd ride his bike over in the morning, sweaty and triumphant, announcing, "We've got fans in Canada now." Or, one of my friends said their grandpa listens to us while mowing the lawn. We recorded in the back room where the sun hit just right, a little fan spinning in the window. Most days we picked a theme, things I learned too late, or what silence taught me. Sometimes we just talked, no script, no pressure. One afternoon, he asked me something that stopped me cold. "Grandpa, are you afraid of dying?" I blinked. "That's a heavy one." He shrugged. "Well, you talk about the past a lot. And about Grandma. And how sound went away and came back. I wonder if you're afraid it'll all disappear again." I looked at him not as a child, not even as my grandson, but as a person trying to understand the fragility of the world. And I told him the truth. I used to be. When the silence first came, I thought it was a preview. Like the world was slowly turning the volume down on me until nothing was left. I paused. But now? No, I'm not afraid anymore. Because I realized something. What? That death doesn't take away the sound we've already made. The echoes stay. If you listen closely, they stay. He smiled, quiet and serious. "So you're an echo now?" "Someday," I said. "But not yet." That same week, James brought over something that surprised me. An old cassette tape. Dusty. Labeled in Clara's handwriting. "For Thomas, 1983. Just in case you forget my voice." My hands shook when I held it. I hadn't seen it in decades. "Where did you find this?" I asked. "In one of Mom's recipe boxes," James said. "Stuffed between some lemon bar instructions and a note that says, 'Don't let Tom near the oven without supervision.'" I laughed. I almost cried. I didn't know if I could play it. But I did. We found my old tape player, miraculously still working, and popped the cassette in. The static came first, then a pause, and then her voice. "Hi, love," Clara said, her tone full of mischief. "If you're hearing this, it means you've either forgotten what I sound like or you're snooping where you shouldn't be." James and I looked at each other. And then we laughed. Deep, aching, grateful laughter. She continued. Stories. Memories. Jokes. She even sang a little bit off key and proud. At one point she said, "If you ever go quiet, really quiet, I hope something brings you back. And I hope it's Ben. I think he's going to be your spark one day." James turned to me, stunned. She said Ben. "She always saw him more than the rest of us," I said, even when the rest of us weren't paying attention. From then on, I began every podcast episode with Clara's voice. Just a few seconds. "Hi, love." It became our intro. People started writing in, asking about her, wanting to know more, wanting to feel what we had felt. So I told her story too. How she helped me survive the war after the war. How she taught me patience when I lost my hearing. How she knew I would come back before I even knew I was gone. How love is louder than silence. One afternoon in August, we got a message from a listener named Eva. She was in hospice. "I've been listening since your first dragon story," she wrote. "You don't know me, but you've kept me company through my quietest days. And I wanted you to know something before I go. I can't hear much anymore. But when I listen to you and Ben, I feel like I'm still here. Still part of something." I wrote back. So did Ben. We sent her a recording. Not about grief, but about joy. About how Ben once got his head stuck in a stair railing and tried to convince the fire department that he was training for a magic act. About how I once danced with Clara in a grocery store aisle because our song came on. About how life, even when quiet, is still music. Eva passed away 2 weeks later. Her son messaged us. Said he played our last recording on repeat by her bedside. Said it made her smile as she slipped away. It was a gift, really. All of it. Even the silence. Maybe especially the silence. Because when you come back from it, when you claw your way back into the noise of life, you start choosing what you hear, what you carry, what matters. I chose love. I chose connection. I chose second chances. And above all, I chose to listen with more than just my ears. On my birthday, James and Ben gave me something I never expected. A book. Hardcover. Blue leather binding. Embossed on the front. The things we heard together. Inside were transcribed podcast episodes. Letters from listeners. Photos. Even a hand-drawn dragon wearing a cape. Signed. For Grandpa, who got his superpower back. I couldn't speak for a full minute. When I finally did, all I could say was, "This is what a life sounds like." Now I'm writing this as fall returns. The leaves are turning again. The wind has that hush of things coming to rest. I sit on the porch most mornings, hearing the world breathe. Sometimes with the 8 in. Sometimes not. Sometimes just in memory. but always with gratitude. Because I got to come back. Because I got to say the things I didn't say before. Because I got to hear my grandson laugh. Because I got to be part of it again. So if you're reading this someday, if you're facing your own kind of silence, if you've forgotten what voices sound like what you sound like, let me tell you something. You're still here. You're still listening. And somewhere, someone is waiting to listen back. Make your way home.